In 1944, while World War II still raged across Europe and the Pacific, 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. What happened in that room would shape the financial destiny of every human being on Earth for the next 8 decades. The delegates weren't there to discuss battle strategies or peace treaties. They were there to decide which country would control the world's money, and America won. On July 22, 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, establishing the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Every major commodity, every international trade deal, every barrel of oil would now be priced and traded in American dollars. It was the greatest financial coup in human history, and it gave the United States a power that no empire had ever possessed before, the ability to print money that the entire world was forced to use. But here's what they didn't tell you at Bretton Woods. This system wasn't built to last forever. It was built on a promise that America broke just 27 years later. In 1971, President Richard Nixon did something that shocked the world. He severed the dollar's tie to gold, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system. The dollar was no longer backed by anything tangible. It became what economists call fiat currency, money that has value simply because the government says it does. Yet somehow, the dollar remained king. How did America maintain this dominance, even after breaking its original promise? The answer lies in a secret deal made in the scorching desert of Saudi Arabia. In 1974, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia and struck a bargain with the Saudi royal family. The Saudis would sell their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars and invest their profits in U.S. Treasury bonds. In return, America would provide military protection and weapons to the Saudi kingdom. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, and it changed everything. Suddenly, every country on Earth needed dollars not just for trade, but for survival. If you wanted to fuel your economy, power your factories, heat your homes, you needed oil. And if you wanted oil, you needed dollars. This created artificial demand for U.S. currency that had nothing to do with the strength of the American economy. Japan needed dollars to buy Saudi oil. Germany needed dollars to buy Saudi oil. China needed dollars to buy Saudi oil. Everyone needed dollars. And there was only one way to get dollars: sell your goods and services to America or borrow them from American banks. This system gave the United States extraordinary privileges. The U.S. government could run massive budget deficits year after year because foreign countries needed to buy treasury bonds to park their excess dollars. The Federal Reserve could print trillions of dollars during financial crises because global demand for dollars would soak up that excess liquidity. American consumers could buy cheap imported goods because other countries were desperate to earn dollars. It was an economic superpower built not on production, but on control of the medium of exchange. But every empire has its breaking point, and the cracks in dollar dominance started appearing in the early 21st century. The first major crack came in 2003, when Saddam Hussein announced that Iraq would begin selling its oil in euros instead of dollars. Within months, the United States invaded Iraq. Whether this was coincidence or consequence remains debated, but the message was clear. Challenging the petrodollar system was dangerous. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya proposed creating a gold-backed African currency called the gold dinar to compete with the dollar and euro. He wanted to sell African oil and resources in this new currency. That same year, NATO intervened in Libya's civil war, and Gaddafi was killed. Again, the pattern emerged: challenge the dollar, face consequences. But then, something changed. The challengers got too big to invade. In 2008, the global financial crisis shook confidence in American financial management. The Federal Reserve's response was to print over $4 trillion through quantitative easing, essentially creating money out of thin air to bail out banks and stabilize markets. Countries holding dollar reserves watched their purchasing power erode through inflation. They began asking uncomfortable questions. Why should we continue playing a game where America can change the rules whenever it faces problems? Why should we hold our national savings in a currency that another country controls and can devalue at will? Why should we finance American deficits while our own people struggle? These questions grew louder after 2014 when the United States weaponized the dollar system against Russia following the annexation of Crimea. America didn't send troops or drop bombs. Instead, it cut Russian banks off from the SWIFT international payment system, froze Russian assets held in dollars, and prohibited American companies from doing business with sanctioned Russian entities. The sanctions demonstrated both the power and the vulnerability of dollar dominance. Yes, America could punish its enemies economically without firing a shot. But in doing so, it revealed to the world that the dollar wasn't just a currency, it was a weapon. And that revelation started a chain reaction that would threaten the entire system. China watched Russia's sanctions and understood immediately what it meant. If the United States could freeze Russian dollar assets and cut them off from the international payment system, it could do the same to China. Every dollar China held in reserves, every treasury bond in its portfolio, every transaction through SWIFT was potentially vulnerable to American political decisions. For a country holding over $3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves, this was an existential threat. The Chinese Communist Party began developing alternatives. They launched the cross-border interbank payment system in 2015, a Chinese alternative to SWIFT. They started denominating more trade deals in yuan rather than dollars. They signed currency swap agreements with dozens of countries, allowing direct yuan exchange without converting to dollars first. They even began stockpiling gold, adding thousands of tons to their reserves. Russia took even more dramatic steps after facing repeated waves of sanctions. They slashed their dollar reserves from over 40% of total reserves to less than 10%. They increased gold holdings to over 20% of reserves, one of the highest percentages of any major economy. They developed their own payment system called SPFS and began trading oil to China and India in currencies other than dollars. Other nations watched and learned. Turkey, Iran, Venezuela, and others facing American sanctions sought ways to trade without dollars. Even allies like France and Germany expressed concerns about dollar weaponization and explored European payment alternatives. The unipolar moment was ending. The acronym BRICS was coined in 2001 by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill to describe four major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa joined in 2010, completing the grouping. Initially, BRICS was just an investment concept, a way to identify fast-growing markets. But over 2 decades, something unexpected happened. BRICS evolved from an economic category into a geopolitical bloc with a shared mission: ending Western financial dominance. The transformation accelerated after the 2008 financial crisis exposed the fragility of Western financial systems, and after repeated use of financial sanctions demonstrated the risks of dollar dependence. In 2014, the BRICS nations established the new development bank with $100 billion in capital, headquartered in Shanghai. Unlike the World Bank or IMF, which the United States effectively controls through voting structures, the new development bank gave equal voting rights to each member. It was designed to fund infrastructure and development projects in emerging economies without the policy conditions that typically come with Western loans. The message was clear: we can finance our own development without submitting to Washington's economic orthodoxy. But a development bank wasn't enough. The real prize was creating an alternative to the dollar itself, and that's exactly what BRICS has been working toward. The idea of a BRICS currency has been discussed since at least 2010, but it gained serious momentum in 2022 following unprecedented Western sanctions against Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions removed major Russian banks from SWIFT, froze over $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, and prohibited Western companies from doing business with Russia. These weren't targeted sanctions against specific individuals or entities. This was financial warfare designed to collapse the Russian economy. Except it didn't work as planned. Russia pivoted to selling oil and gas to China and India in rubles and rupees. Russian imports shifted from Western goods to Chinese products. The ruble, which collapsed initially, recovered within months. The Russian economy contracted but didn't collapse. And most importantly, the rest of the world learned a crucial lesson. Alternatives to the dollar system exist if countries are willing to develop them. At the 2022 BRICS summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that BRICS nations were developing a new reserve currency based on a basket of member currencies. This wasn't just rhetoric. Working groups were established, feasibility studies commissioned, technical infrastructure planned. At the 2023 BRICS summit in South Africa, the bloc took another dramatic step by inviting 6 new members: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Though Argentina later declined under its new government, the expansion was strategically brilliant. Iran brought oil resources and a desperate need for sanctions alternatives. Egypt and Ethiopia added African representation and Suez Canal access. Most critically, Saudi Arabia and the UAE represented the heart of the petrodollar system itself. If the nations that created petrodollar dominance were now exploring alternatives, the entire foundation of dollar hegemony was cracking. The proposed BRICS currency faces enormous technical and political challenges. Currency unions require coordination of monetary policy, which is extremely difficult for countries as diverse as Brazil, China, and South Africa. Each nation has different inflation rates, interest rates, capital controls, and economic priorities. The euro took decades to implement among closely aligned European nations with similar development levels, and it still faces persistent problems. How could countries as different as India and Iran coordinate monetary policy effectively? Some proposals suggest the BRICS currency wouldn't be a single currency like the euro, but rather a settlement currency used only for international trade while each country maintains its domestic currency. Think of it as a shared accounting unit that facilitates trade between members without requiring conversion to dollars. Others propose backing the currency with a basket of commodities, including gold, oil, and rare earth minerals, giving it tangible value beyond government decree. The technology infrastructure is also developing rapidly. China's digital yuan is already operational domestically and being tested for international transactions. Russia's SPFS payment system now connects to banks in dozens of countries. The BRICS Pay system is being developed to allow seamless transactions between member nations using QR codes and phone apps, bypassing SWIFT entirely. India's Unified Payments Interface processes billions of domestic transactions and is being adapted for international use. These aren't theoretical proposals. This is functioning infrastructure being tested and refined right now. The economic logic behind BRICS currency is compelling for member nations. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa together represent over 40% of the world's population and roughly 25% of global GDP. When expanded, BRICS is included, the numbers grow even larger. These countries trade extensively with each other. China is the largest trading partner for most BRICS nations. Why should they convert to dollars and back when trading with each other? Every conversion involves transaction costs, exchange rate risks, and exposure to American financial oversight. A BRICS settlement currency could eliminate these inefficiencies while reducing dollar dependence. The implications for American power are staggering. Dollar dominance allows the United States to run persistent trade deficits without consequences. Americans consume more than they produce, importing the difference and paying with printed dollars that other countries must accept. If global dollar demand falls because countries use alternatives for trade, America would face difficult adjustments. The federal government could no longer run unlimited deficits financed by foreign treasury bond purchases. The Federal Reserve couldn't print trillions without triggering severe inflation. American consumers couldn't enjoy artificially cheap imports. Interest rates would likely rise substantially as the government competed for limited capital. This doesn't mean the dollar would disappear overnight. Reserve currencies change slowly over decades, not years. The British pound remained a major reserve currency for decades after Britain lost its empire. Network effects and institutional inertia favor existing systems. The dollar still represents about 60% of global foreign exchange reserves and nearly 90% of foreign exchange transactions. That dominance won't vanish quickly. But the trend is clear and accelerating. Dollar share of global reserves has fallen from 72% in 2000 to roughly 58% today. More countries are signing bilateral trade agreements in local currencies. Central banks are diversifying reserves into gold, euros, yuan, and other assets. The infrastructure for dollar alternatives is being built and tested. Each sanctions episode, each quantitative easing program, each debt ceiling crisis accelerates this process. The United States faces a strategic dilemma with no easy solution. Continuing to weaponize the dollar through sanctions pushes more countries toward alternatives. But not using financial leverage means abandoning America's most powerful coercive tool short of military force. Reforming the international financial system to give other countries more influence might slow their exit but would require surrendering the privileges that dollar dominance provides. Meanwhile, domestic political dysfunction makes international partners question American reliability as monetary manager for the global economy. The outcome of this currency competition will shape the 21st century as profoundly as Bretton Woods shaped the 20th. If BRICS successfully creates a viable alternative to the dollar for international trade, we're moving toward a multipolar financial system where no single country controls the global monetary architecture. American power would decline not through military defeat but through financial obsolescence. Alternatively, if BRICS currency fails due to internal contradictions and coordination problems, dollar dominance could persist for decades more despite its obvious flaws and the resentment it generates. History suggests the second outcome is more likely, but history also shows that empires always believe their dominance will last forever, right up until it suddenly doesn't.